On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Panama Canal levels are dropping. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So the Panama Canal Authority has announced that they're going to be reducing the maximum draft allowed for vessels transiting the canal. As a result of this, trans-Pacific ocean carriers are getting set to impose hefty surcharges starting June 1st to prioritize cargo coming from Asia to the U.S. East and Gulf coasts. All of this has to do with a drought taking place right now in Panama that is forcing the Gatun Lake, this is the main lake that feeds into the locks, to get lower and lower, thereby reducing the permissible draft or the depth of water that a ship can be at. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this story. Before we do so, if you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right. So here's the story we're going to be referencing. It's a Lodestar story over at G-Captain. Panama Canal draft restrictions could halt the coastal shift. So Hapag Lloyd has announced a $500 per container charge, a Panama Canal charge, effective June 1st. This goes on with an advisory that's come out. So the advisory to shipping issued by the Panama Canal Authority said that the maximum draft allowed for vessels transiting the canal from 24 May would be reduced to 44.5 feet, 13.56 meters. In addition, effective 30 May, the maximum allowed draft allowed for vessels transiting the Neo-Panamax locks, this is the new locks built in 2016, would be further reduced down to 44 feet. The Panama Canal Authority will continue to monitor the levels of Gatun Lake and announce future draft adjustments in a timely manner. This all coincides with a shift of cargo from the U.S. West Coast to the Atlantic coast. Now, this has been going on since the canal opened its new lane in 2016, which allowed ships of up to 13,000 TEUs to travel. Prior to this, you were really restricted to vessels under 4,500 TEUs. And we've been seeing this transition take place. Matter of fact, we're now at one point seeing vessels of up to 15,000 TEUs coming through. And we've been monitoring this story since it took place. Here's a story from Mike Schuller. Back in April, West Coast ports losing 1 million TEUs per year to the eastward import shift. If you go over to John McCown's report, John McCown over at Blue Alpha Capital, he does a monthly report on container shipping. He's been tracking this, and he's been tracking the shift from the West Coast to the East Coast. And what you see here, this goes all the way back to January of 2017. Remember, the new lane of the canal opened in 2016, and now you get these new Neo-Panamax vessels coming in. And what we saw here was a pretty steady downward surge in that cargo. It kind of kicked back up during COVID when all of a sudden there was a big shift of moving cargo to the West Coast, but then it continued its downward shift up until the end of 2022, and now we're seeing a little bit of a upward tick again. But notice it's still below the 50% threshold, meaning more than 50% of cargo is heading to the East and Gulf Coast versus over to the West Coast. According to his reports, in April, East and Gulf Coast port terminals handled 888,000 TEUs compared to 813,000 TEUs on the West Coast. This includes the port of New York, New Jersey, which has now overtaken Long Beach to be the second busiest U.S. port for imports and is fast catching up on L.A. April was the 23rd straight month where the percentage change in volume at East Gulf Coast ports outperformed West Coast ports. All right, let's look at the data of what is happening at the Panama Canal. So this is the Panama Canal. This is Panama right here. South end here is the Pacific. The north end here is the Atlantic. You actually travel northwest in the canal to get to the Atlantic. And the large water body right here, this is Gatun Lake right here in the center. So down here, this is where you have the locks. You have two sets of locks here. These are the old locks. These are the old Miraflores locks. These are the original locks built and opened back in 1914. And then this is the new lane. And one of the things you'll notice here are these three massive pools. This is to reclaim water. The way the Panama Canal works, they take water from the lake and spill it into the lock. So they pour it into the lock through pipes and you go up. To go out, they actually have to pour water out of the locks. And usually in the past, that water was just spilled out into the Atlantic or the Pacific. However, one of the things they incorporated into the new lane are these catch basins so that they can reclaim that water and catch it and not prevent it from spilling into the Atlantic and the Pacific. This is the south end of the Panama Canal. You come up here through the cut, and then you're out across Gatun Lake, and then you go through the locks here. Again, you have sets of locks. These are the old locks on the west side, and then the new locks here on the east side, and then you're out into the Atlantic. Right now you're seeing vessels in queue for transit to the Panama Canal. In terms of the Neo-Panamax, there are 9 vessels booked, there are 4 vessels not booked. And if you look at the wait time, which is really the key, Neo-Panamax northbound, these are vessels coming from the Pacific to the Atlantic. It's about 3 to 4 days, about 1 to 2 days coming southbound. So these are the big vessels that require the new locks to use. But this is the table that is the most damning, and this is the water levels published by the Panama Canal Authority. Right here they show as of May 28th the water level, or May 26th, excuse me, water level on Gatun Lake is at 80.5 feet. And this sets the official maximum drafts at 44.5 feet for Neo-Panamax and 39.5 feet for Panamax. 39.5 feet Panamax, those are the old locks. So here you go. And then there's a variable freshwater surcharge for all transits that begin on May 26th. So you're going to pay a surcharge on top of your normal toll. And what you see here is the projections, and these are projections, that water levels are going to fall from 80.5 feet all the way down here by the end of July to about 78 feet, a little bit over, is the historic average. So again, we're roughly sitting at about 80.5 feet right now coming out of May. Historically, we're usually at 83.2. In July, we're talking about being down to 78 feet, but usually what we see is June and July is over the 5-year average, the water level has increased. That is not happening at the canal. Instead, what we're seeing is canal levels are dropping, and that is what's causing the concern. What this translates to you is this, is that now containers may cost more to come through the Panama Canal. To get the priority, you're going to have to pay a surcharge. This is exactly what we saw happen at the port of LA and Long Beach during the supply chain crisis. We saw all of a sudden the rates to come through the Panama Canal, or come through ports of LA and Long Beach go up. You're seeing it now for the canal. Understand, it is not easy to swing back cargo from the East and Gulf Coast back to LA and Long Beach. You need warehouses, you need trucks, you need all the infrastructure set up. What we know that has happened is that shippers, people who are getting cargo shipped, have diversified where their cargo is coming in. They're coming into multiple points. They're not just relying on LA and Long Beach anymore. And so what you're going to see is cargo levels on ships coming through the Panama Canal drop. We'll see rates go up because of these surcharges. We'll see more cargo diverted onto the ultra-large container vessels. These are the big mega container vessels, the 20,000 plus TEU vessels heading to Europe, and then transloaded onto vessels coming across the Atlantic to the East and Gulf Coast. Those rates have been fairly higher than normal, than pre-COVID average. The Trans-Pacific routes to the West Coast are really low, really, really low. But again, people want to get the cargo to the East and Gulf Coast because that's where the population is, and that's where many people have moved their distribution centers and warehouses to. And so as the Panama Canal starts diverting cargo, as we start seeing those cargo levels get smaller on ships, to get the draft of the vessels up, as it becomes more expensive to go through the Panama Canal, we'll see cargo transshipping onto those ultra-large container vessels going through the Suez Canal, which is raising levels up rates too, not water levels. Water level of the Suez Canal is fine, but they're raising rates because they know traffic is going to be coming that way, and then across the Atlantic. All of this means is we're seeing shipping charges increase. As more cargo now starts materializing on the U.S. West Coast, we may see rates start ticking up again a little bit more. This is a really interesting dynamic we're seeing take place. The reason for Gatun Lake dropping has to do with just lack of rain in that region. What causes it? Leave that up to climatologists and scientists to come up. All I know is this is how it impacts shipping. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Very simply. You can go ahead and hit that super thanks button below where you can contribute to the page or become a patron of the page. You'll see a link to Patreon come up at the end of the video or down in the show notes. You become a monthly, yearly subscriber. I appreciate all the support I get. Working on some great videos coming out for you. I got a response to a Jones Act video that was posted last week that I'm working on. And I just did an interview with a author, both of naval fiction and nonfiction, Claude Berbet, who's the director of the U.S. Naval Academy Museum. That will be dropping next week. I think you're going to enjoy it. Claude and I had a great time talking. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off.